Happy Friday. How's everybody doing? I'm phenomenal. I'm so happy about Friday. Yeah. Well, today I want to talk about the story of trauma, right? Because you don't all of a sudden, most people who experience trauma don't necessarily recognize it in the moment. Not everybody, our world in general, isn't trauma informed. And so there's not necessarily somebody in the moment of an experience who's there to raise their hand and say, hey, you, it looks like you just had an experience of trauma. Why don't we help you heal? Right. So a lot of people, and most people who get help for trauma, begin their journey and kind of wade through the majority of their journey in the dark, much like I did. And perhaps you sitting at home, you might feel this way. Like you feel like you're suffering. You've been suffering for a really long time. You feel like you're trying to tackle different symptoms, but in general, you just don't really feel like you're getting anywhere and you feel like you're in the dark. So, I was highly educated. I was on my way to a PhD in clinical psychology, and still my reality eluded me. So it doesn't matter how much you know about a certain topic, and even my educating you today may or may not help. But the more we do become a trauma informed society as a whole, the more we can help each other. And, it's one of my purposes, not just to help people heal and transform trauma, to awaken from it, but to also become more educated about why they're suffering today and how they can heal from it. So, trauma is like that. The way it behaves in a person's system and the way it affects us, and because it eludes so many of us, the majority of people actually have suffered from trauma but don't realize it. So many types of traumas can occur: micro traumas like microaggressions, collective trauma, historical trauma. And collective trauma includes things like natural disasters, things like that. COVID. As a collective society, we experience trauma on a collective level. Historical trauma, intergenerational, that's where trauma is passed down by the generations, but also through the genetics. Medical trauma, chronic trauma, where trauma is consistently occurring for a person. And then people experience just singular events, like one offs. A lot of people get caught up with this label. And I don't blame anybody, because labels are really heavy. They can feel heavy. Trauma, right? And most of us in general have been led to believe that trauma only happens to people who have been severely physically or sexually abused, or who are like war vets, like somewhere in those two categories. Unfortunately, terribly unfortunately, that actually couldn't be further from the truth. Trauma is actually just the body's fight, flight, or freeze response to an event that feels life threatening to the system. So you might not even consciously be aware, and a lot of people aren't, especially as babies, young children, that an event is life threatening, but your nervous system perceives it as life threatening. And your whole fight or flight response sets off. And that experience can be traumatic. The way trauma endures is when that trauma is, I'll get to that in a moment, but let me give an example of an event that for an adult can be completely innocuous, but for like a small child or a baby can be very traumatic. A loud sound. So for an adult who hears a loud sound, it might startle them, but they can go on with their day, right? They can process it. They know the context of it. For a baby or a small child, it may startle their whole system. They become dysregulated. They start crying. They can't stop crying. They're in a fight flight response, and nothing calms them down. And then throughout their life, anytime they hear a loud bang, a loud sound, they get really startled and they start feeling anxiety. And maybe they don't even know where that originates. That's one example. So this response causes a person to become dysregulated and leave their window of arousal. During this time, trauma sits in the body. It carves neural pathways in the brain, and it tells a person, in a sense, what to fear, right? Certain stimuli, any stimuli that remind a person of the event they just experienced, can over time become what are called triggers. And that's how later in life you get triggered by things and you have no idea why. Because sometime earlier in life, something caused you deep distress. We can call it trauma, we can call it stress, we can call it anxiety, we can call it deep distress. Put any of those labels on it, that is essentially trauma. And the longer a person remains in this trauma state, again, simply an elevated fight, flight, or freeze response where you are fearing for your life, maybe not consciously, but your body is in a place where it's like, I gotta fight for my life. The extreme of that is the freeze response where the body just shuts down, right? And the longer your body stays in this response, the more long-term effects a person has, and the harder it becomes to heal. So how do you know if you've suffered from trauma, right? That's the question. To be honest, a lot of people don't, and you may not. You may not have any memories of having some pretty severe events in your life or anything that caused you distress. You may feel like you have had a really happy life. A lot of people with trauma actually repress their memories. That said, if you are deeply unhappy, if you are in pain, if you are suffering, if you're experiencing certain symptoms, which I'm going to go over in a moment, it's possible, not certain, but it's possible that it's rooted in trauma. And keep in mind, when you are living with chronic ailments, anxiety, depression, chronic illnesses, over time, they themselves can cause trauma. So even if you didn't have trauma before, it's very possible you're enduring trauma just through the experience of what you're living now. Such as, like, especially people with chronic illnesses. I have a lot of clients who have chronic illnesses and they regularly experience medical trauma. So let's talk about the symptoms of trauma. And if any of you at home feel any of these, maybe it's time to take a deeper look at their origin. So things like anxiety, depression, panic attacks. Let's talk about panic attacks for a moment. A lot of people have them. They have them for years. They have no idea that they've been having a panic attack. Heart rate increases. You start to sweat. Often feel a heaviness in the chest. It can feel like you're having a heart attack. You feel like you're going to pass out. Palms get sweaty. So a panic attack is very much related to trauma. People don't even know that they've been having them for years. And so they definitely don't recognize the signs of trauma. Other symptoms of trauma, brain fog, like you can't think straight. I have some clients who they are deep into their healing and they have come a long way. They're different people now than they were, 6 months ago. But still, when they get triggered, they spend the rest of the day not being able to even read emails, not being able to concentrate, things like that. That's pretty severe brain fog and cognitive dysfunction, inability to think straight, because the social engagement system, the polyvagal nerve, shuts down during the trauma response. And so you can't read social cues, you can't think straight. Trauma. Other symptoms, stomach aches, headaches on a recurring basis, right? Sleeplessness, irritability, feeling hopeless, purposelessness, addictions, self-harm, things like that. We can go on and on. The point being, you can treat any of these symptoms like anxiety, and it's highly recommended, right? Like a disease, though, right? When you suffer for long enough, when you treat the symptoms alone, you can only get so far in your healing process. Only by getting to the root of the symptom do you really deeply heal and transform whatever's causing that symptom. And you might not even realize you're only you feel like anxiety is the tip of the iceberg, but maybe there are all these other symptoms underneath that iceberg that you don't even realize you've been experiencing for so long. And by getting to the root of that anxiety, again, often, you know, it could have been an experience you had when you were really young. Call it trauma, don't call it trauma, it doesn't matter. But that experience disrupted you, became woven into your self identity, and now causes you great anxiety. How do you heal? You get to the root of it. You get to the root of it. You find where it's sitting in your body, where your body's held it for decades. And that's some work that I can do. And if you're interested in learning more about the work that I do and how I help people transform trauma and literally let it like shift and move in their body and be released from their body, I'm happy to talk to you about it. You can sign up for a free 30-minute somatic discovery session. There's a link in my bio. If you have any questions, obviously DM me. That's my What's a Trauma Story live today. But yeah, I think I just want to share that you don't have to suffer. A lot of people are really scared, and people I know very well, closely, believe that they're too far gone or they've been in pain for too long and that they can't heal. They fear that it's gone on too long for them. There's always a moment and there's always a possibility you can heal. There is a core self inside of you. There's a core soul that has been untouched by trauma. Right? The trauma is just in your nervous system. It's in your body. And your body is not you. It's not who you are. And so the work to heal the trauma is peeling back the layers of all this bullshit, of all this stuff that's been piled on top of you, calming the nervous system, and then helping you connect with that core self, with that vision, with that reality, the truth inside of you. So you can move through the world from this really strong place of inner self trust. You push away all the self doubt, all the fears, it just all melts away. So, happy Friday. Have a beautiful weekend. I'll see you soon. Bye.